She is strapped to a hospital bed. A doctor counts down, then pushes a clear liquid into a vein. Her eyes shut, her breath catches, and in seconds she says she is no longer in the room. What if the craziest drug trip known to science is not a party story but a keyhole into how your brain builds reality? Source: PubMed 1994. This story is about DMT, short for N-dimethyltryptamine, a psychedelic compound that can produce an intense, short experience that many people describe as another world. In labs, the strongest effects can arrive within minutes and fade within about half an hour. Source: PubMed 1994. It matters now because DMT has moved from rumor to research again. Universities and hospitals are studying it to understand consciousness and also to test if carefully controlled psychedelic experiences could help some forms of suffering. But the same thing that can feel meaningful for one person can feel frightening for another. Source: Frontiers in Neuroscience, 2018. In the mid-1800s, a British botanist named Richard Spruce traveled through the Amazon and recorded a powerful ritual drink used by indigenous communities. He observed ceremonies and collected samples of the vine later known as Banisteriopsis caapi, one of the key plants used in ayahuasca preparations. At the time, Spruce could not isolate what made the experience so intense. The drink looked like a plant brew, but the effect suggested something far stronger than most known medicines of the era. In hindsight, that mystery makes sense. The brew is usually a combination, and the trip depends on how plants work together. Decades later, in 1931, chemist Richard Manske synthesized DMT in the lab. It was a simple-looking molecule on paper, and at first it was not treated as a mind-bending compound. The big twist is that the molecule existed in science before many researchers understood what it could do in humans. In the 1950s, researchers began connecting pieces. DMT appears in nature and can be linked to strong psychoactive experiences. Reviews of the history describe how its hallucinogenic properties were confirmed after clinical administration in the 1950s. Around the same era, psychedelic science expanded in public awareness through LSD research and culture. On April 19, 1943, Swiss chemist Albert Hofmann famously took LSD and experienced intense perceptual changes on his bicycle ride home, a moment later remembered as Bicycle Day. That event did not involve DMT, but it set a pattern. Tiny molecules can cause huge shifts in mind and perception. Then came the crackdown. In 1971, the United Nations adopted the Convention on Psychotropic Substances, creating an international control system for many psychoactive drugs. In many places, this pushed psychedelic research into a long freeze with only limited, tightly controlled studies continuing. In the early 1990s, a U.S. psychiatrist, Rick Strassman, reopened a door that had been almost closed for decades. His team ran controlled human studies and published clinical findings on dose response and timing, including how quickly effects appear and fade. The work did not solve DMT, but it made the subject measurable again. Over the next years, newer teams used modern tools like brain imaging, and the public conversation grew louder. Some journalists followed lab groups attempting to map what happens in the brain during the peak experience. Researchers described DMT as a rare tool. It can change consciousness strongly, and yet the window is short enough to study in real time. Question: what would you notice first? Now we switch to evidence cards, not rumors, not vibes, just what was reported by whom and when. Evidence Card 1. A controlled human study reported that peak blood levels and peak subjective effects occurred within about 2 minutes after intravenous administration, and effects were negligible by around 30 minutes. That is not a myth. That is a clinical report in a peer-reviewed journal. Evidence Card 2. A major survey study focused on people who said they had an entity encounter after inhaling DMT. The paper describes an online survey with thousands of respondents and analyzes what they recalled as their most memorable encounter. Surveys cannot prove what was out there, but they can measure how often certain experiences are reported and how people interpret them. Evidence Card 3. A Johns Hopkins news release summarizes results from that same line of work, describing how many respondents said their sense of reality changed after the experience. This is a secondary summary, not the raw paper, so we treat it as context, not final proof. Evidence Card 4. Scientific reviews describe DMT as endogenous, meaning it has been detected in mammalian bodies and is discussed as a compound that may be produced within the body under certain conditions. Reviews also outline what is known and what remains uncertain about where, when, and why it appears in humans. Evidence Card 5, Plant chemistry research explains why ayahuasca is not just DMT in a cup. The vine Banisteriopsis copy contains compounds that inhibit monoamine oxidase, which can make oral DMT active, while other plants contribute DMT itself. This is a biochemical explanation for why traditional combinations matter. Sidebar: endogenous means found naturally in the body. Here is the first big gap. When people report entities, science can measure the report, but it cannot confirm the external reality of what was seen. One interpretation is psychological. Under DMT, the brain's systems for social meaning and agency detection may become unusually active, so the mind generates the feeling of someone else is here. Another interpretation is cultural. Stories shape expectations, and expectations shape memory. Surveys show patterns, but patterns are not proof of an outside being. Source: PubMed 2020. There is also a gap between lab settings and real life. A controlled dose in a monitored room is not the same as an uncontrolled environment. So even if a clinical paper documents timing and basic physiological changes, it does not automatically predict long-term outcomes for every person. This is why careful language matters. Reported, associated, suggests, not proves. Source: PubMed 1994. Finally, the DMT is made in the brain idea is often repeated online with extra certainty. Scientific reviews discuss evidence and hypotheses, but they also emphasize uncertainty about exact levels, locations, and functions in humans. In plain English, it is intriguing, it is being studied, and it is not fully settled. Document: Scientific Review Source: Frontiers in Neuroscience 2018. INFOCARD, What We Know versus Unconfirmed. For some people, the DMT experience is described as meaningful, emotional, even healing. They may report a reset in how they see themselves, or a deep sense of connection, or relief from rigid, painful thoughts. Surveys and interviews often capture this language. I felt guided, I felt loved, I saw my life clearly. Those are subjective outcomes, but subjectivity is still part of human reality. Source: Hopkins Medicine 2020. For others, it can be destabilizing. A rapid, overwhelming shift in perception can trigger fear, confusion, or lingering anxiety, especially in people with existing mental health vulnerabilities. Research papers and clinical practice both stress screening and support, because a powerful experience is not automatically a positive one. Document: Scientific Review. And then there is the social impact. DMT sits in a legal and moral crosswind. Indigenous traditions, modern wellness markets, strict drug laws, and medical research all collide around the same molecule. People can be searching for relief, community, or meaning, while also facing stigma, risk, or legal consequences depending on where they live. Source: UNODC 1971 Treaty System. Think of your mind like a film director. Most days, it chooses what to show you, what to ignore, and what story your senses become. Under DMT, many researchers think the usual director loses control and the brain allows new connections and new scenes to flood the screen. That may help explain why the experience can feel more real than real, even when it is internally generated. Another metaphor is a mixing desk in a studio. Normally, your brain keeps the channels separated: sight, sound, memory, emotion. Under strong psychedelics, the sliders may move fast and unpredictably. You can get beauty, you can get chaos, and the same person might get both minutes apart. This matters beyond drugs. If a molecule can change reality so completely, then reality is partly a construction. That has ethical weight. It touches mental health care, religious experience, and even how we treat human testimony. It also touches law. The same societies that restrict these substances are now funding studies to see if controlled use could help patients. Source: UNODC Treaty Context, Research Resurgence Reporting. We know DMT can create a fast, intense altered state that peaks quickly and fades within about 30 minutes in clinical settings. Source: PubMed 1994. We know thousands of people report entity encounters, and researchers can measure how common those reports are. Source: PubMed 2020. We do not know with certainty why the experience takes that form or what role DMT might naturally play in the human body. Source: Frontiers in Neuroscience 2018. Now for the final act: what happens next when mystery meets medicine, culture, and law? Scenario 1: more controlled clinical studies with better tools and larger sample sizes. Confidence high. The trend is already visible in the way research groups publicly describe ongoing work and in continued publication in peer-reviewed venues. Scenario 2, a split future where medical DMT research expands while non-medical use remains restricted in many countries. Confidence, high. International control frameworks exist and policy change is usually slow, especially for psychedelics. Scenario 3, clearer explanations of entity encounters tied to brain networks involved in social meaning and self-other boundaries. Confidence, medium. Surveys and brain mapping efforts point toward testable hypotheses, but translating that into a single clean explanation may take years. Scenario 4, proof that DMT has a specific, everyday biological function in humans at meaningful levels. Confidence, low to medium. Reviews describe evidence and active investigation, but they also underline uncertainty about exact roles and mechanisms. Question: if your brain can build worlds, what else is it building? Maybe the craziest part is not the visions. Maybe it's the reminder that your normal life, this room, this moment, this self, depends on fragile systems that can shift in seconds. If you want the next chapter, watch our related film, How Your Brain Invents Reality and Why It Usually Works.